order right, if we want to change what we're experiencing in many ways when it comes to what life is dishing out to us, again, it starts with the order, and getting the order right starts with putting God first. Putting God first. Because listen, and here's where the breakthrough comes, is that when God is first, when God is in the right place, I really believe this, he puts everything else in its right place. When we put God in the right place, he puts everything else in the right place. In other words, listen, if God is in the right place, you can't have your marriage in the wrong place. Because ultimately God will set it into order. And again, we're talking about order here. And not balance. Because in terms of balance, again, so often it's like my life is just out of balance. If I could create some balance, then everything would just kind of come together. But I would dare say this, is that actually balance is actually the enemy of order. Balance is the enemy of order, because if your life is in balance, it's likely out of order. Because listen, balance is about equal distribution. It's about equal distribution, equal allotment of time and effort and sweat equity. I mean, it's an equal distribution of weight to every single side. But order is not about equal distribution, it's about appropriate distribution. I can put it this way, is if I balance my time in all my relationships, that means that you get as much time as my wife gets. Again, in balance, but how many know out of order? And if I did that for too long, I would also be out of the house, right? I mean, it's, again, this difference between balance and order. Order is not about equal distribution, but it's about appropriate distribution. And I share that because I think a lot of us, we kind of treat God with this kind of balanced mentality. That I'm just going to sort of balance my time. I showed up to church one day a week. I got that fixed in there. Now I got to balance it out with some time with the family, some time with sports, or balance it out with some time with my work pursuits. And we treat life as this juggling act of balance. But the reality is, again, if you want God to order your steps, it takes us putting him in the proper order in our life. And it's about order, again, not simply balance. And again, I think it's got the ability to really change so much of our lives. Again, speaking of breakthrough in the new year. In fact, I like how Leviticus 27:30 speaks of this, of putting God first, of making sure we've got the order right when it comes to our life. Leviticus 27:30 says, a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It's holy to the Lord. I like that. A tithe of everything. So often when we refer to this verse, we refer to it oftentimes in relation to giving principles. But it's so much more than that. This is a life principle. Notice the key word there is a tithe of everything. This isn't simply talking about money. This is talking about your approach to life. And I wonder, for some of us, what is the first thing you did when you woke up in the morning, as opposed to grabbing that device and listening and reading about what everyone else thinks about the world or thinks about you? How would our lives be different if instead of reaching for this device that brings with it so much tendency to compare, so much tendency to envy, if instead we actually put God first? If we started off with a tithe of everything, a tithe of our efforts, a tithe of our time, of actually putting God first, putting him in the right place when it comes to the order of our lives. Of getting along with him, getting in his word, spending time with him in prayer. And look, I get the pushback. A lot of us are like, man, I'm too busy for that. You don't know how I go, hey, listen, I tell you, you're too busy not to. You're too busy not to. Listen, if you don't like what you're getting in life, what life is dishing up, could it be that you've got the order all wrong when it comes to your life? And so we see this mistake that's caused by rushing the relationship, of rushing to order. And as a result, in Joshua's life, it leads to this mess that we see in chapter 10. And we see in Joshua 10, verse 3 through 4, it says, so King Adonizedek of Jerusalem sent messengers to several other kings. Come and help me destroy Gibeon, he urged them, for they have made peace with Joshua and the people of Israel. So the people of Gibeon, upon finding this out, upon hearing this news, they go into panic. So they send messengers to Joshua and his camp in Gilgal, pleading for help, right? And so get this, Joshua 10:9. Here's sort of the mess it creates. Joshua, it says, traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. So get this, Joshua has to pull his best fighting man and his best troops away from the front lines, away from the fight that he was called to fight. The very purpose and the land he was called to take. He is to stop from that. He is to pull back from that. And actually travel all night long to try to help out these people because of this mistake by getting tied in with the wrong people. And as a result, talk about exhausting. Again, this is overnight, all night long they had to march to kind of bail the people of Gibeon out. And I share that because, listen, what you got to get is there's nothing more fatiguing than fighting someone else's battles. There's nothing more fatiguing in life than fighting someone else's battles. A fight you weren't prepared for, a fight you weren't called to, a fight you weren't equipped for. In fact, by the way, that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about our series next week, is because that whole series is all talking about what is our fight? What is the territory God has called us to? What's the good fight of faith God has called us to? In fact, I like how Paul puts it. He says, man, I fought the good fight of faith, which in turn means if there's a good fight, that means there can also be some wrong fights. So some good causes, maybe even great causes, that sometimes if we're not careful, we can end up wearing ourselves out, fighting everyone else's fight, fighting and trying to run everyone else's race, trying to answer someone else's call, never actually fighting the fight we've been called to fight. To walk in the call and the purpose that God has called us to. And so over the next several weeks, we're actually going to really unpack and really clarify what is our fight. When God talks about fighting the good fight of faith for us as a church body, what does that look like? And really kind of clarify God's call and God's, pursuit and mission that He's placed on us as a body, on us as a church. And again, so it's so important there because, again, I think one of the reasons in a church and in life, one of the reasons I think so many of us, we can go through seasons where we get so fatigued and we get so tired is, again, is because we're fighting sometimes the wrong fights. And that's what happens with Joshua here. He makes the mistake, and as a result, there's this mess, and you just see the fatigue of trying to have to go all night long to try to bail out and try to kind of resurrect this mistake that he had caused. And as we see the Israelites being dragged into someone else's drama at the expense of their direction, which leads to the last part. And this is the part that most excites me, is we see it leading to the miracle. So we've got a mistake, we've got a mess, and as a result, in the process, we're going to discover the miracle in all of this. And we see this in Joshua 10, verse 12. It says, on the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. Prayed to the Lord in front of all the people. Which, by the way, which is crazy when you think about it, especially what he's about to pray for. Like we're about to read the miracle that he's praying for. I mean, it's crazy what he's about to pray for, what he's about to ask God for. And in fact, I mean, so much so that it's safe to say I don't know if I would have the courage or the audacity to actually want to pray that out loud in front of people. It'd be one of those things like, I mean, think about it. You were like praying something just so ridiculous, so crazy, so audacious. You knew the only way it was going to happen is if God showed up. Well, like, how many know you're not going to probably stand up there and pray that in front of a large crowd, in front of, an entire nation. You're probably going to do that in secret because, what if it doesn't work, or what if it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go? And yet that's not what Joshua does. He calls the people forward, he calls the nation forward, and he makes this bold request. He has this amazing miracle that he prays for. He said, get this, let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. So in other words, God, I got a small request for you. If you could just stop the whole rotation of the earth, just stop the galaxy as a whole, just hit pause button, just for a little while. Nothing too big here. Just stop the entire movement of the universe, right? Because listen because remember the setting here. They're walking all night long. They're trying to fix this mistake and the mess that has been kind of created from this mistake of Joshua's poor decision. And now, here's the thing that struck me, and here's why I kind of bring all this up to you, is that, and really, this is the part that so encourages me and that hopefully encourages you, is notice that it's the man who made the mistake is the same man who asked for the miracle. The man who made the mistake in Joshua is the same man who asked for this crazy, audacious miracle. And look, I share that because I think for some of us it's so easy to pray for God to show up in a situation we know we didn't cause. Like when there's a situation that's, let's be honest, beyond our control. Maybe a health issue, circumstance at work that's beyond our control. It's easy to pray for a miracle in those situations. It's easy to pray for a miracle when it's something that's been done to us, a circumstance or a situation that someone put us in, a tough spot somebody put us in, to pray for a miracle. God, can you bail me out of this? Can you pull me through this? But what do you do when it's your decision? When it's my decision? When I made the mess? When I made the mistake? When I did this thing, I messed up the relationship, I messed up the job. See, for the Israelites, the only reason they were where they were was the reason they were stuck in this situation to begin with is because, again, Joshua made a mistake. Joshua allowing the relationship to be rushed, allowing the order to get out of whack, not seeking God in this, it stepped into this mistake that led to a mess. And yet, in spite of all this, Joshua has the audacity to stop in front of all the people and say, yeah, man, I made a mistake, but just wait a minute. Just wait a minute. In fact, we see the whole dynamic of this miracle here in verse 13 through 14. It says, so the sun stood still and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. The sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set as on a normal day. There's never been a day like this one before or since when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. I love this. Again, one of the greatest, craziest, unbelievable miracles in all the Bible happened when? It happened after Joshua's mistake. It happened following Joshua's mess. And listen, I know this is hard for some of us to sometimes grasp, maybe even sometimes believe, but listen, sometimes God's greatest miracles are often in response to our worst mistakes. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are in response to our worst mistakes. And again, this is tough for some of us because so often we look at it, especially when it's our mistake, when it's our doing, when it's our bad decision. It can be so easy to sit there and think, man, how could I possibly ask God for a miracle? How could I possibly believe that God would want anything to do with me after what I did, after the mistake I just made? And sometimes we struggle to ask for the miracle, and we just sort of settle in just thinking, well, I made the mistake, I made the mess, I guess it's just my bad, I'm just going to have to lay in it, I sowed the seed, I'm just going to have to reap it. And listen, so often, by the way, this is really one of the great strategies of our enemy. That enemy, remember, wants to seek to steal, kill, and destroy our lives. Listen, one of the ways he does it is this very thing right here. So often he'll try to bait you into the sin, bait you into the mistake, and then convince you that after the fact, that this mistake somehow excludes you from the possibility of God's miracle in your life. That the moment that you step beyond those boundary lines of God's blessing, that somehow the moment you step beyond it, somehow you made that decision, somehow you made that mistake, that somehow you can't ever go back. You can't ever go back into that place of His favor. Go back into the place of His grace. But listen, what you got to understand is that you can never step beyond His grace. I don't care how big the mistake was. I don't care how big the failure was. You can never step beyond His grace. And the reason your enemy, follows this line of thinking and follows this line of attack is because the enemy knows that this very reality as well. That this truth, that your enemy knows that no matter how badly you messed up, God can still show up and turn it around. In fact, that's the gospel message, right? That's the very gospel message, is that God's greatest miracle happened after our worst mistake. We see this in Romans 5:15. It says, for if the many died by the trespass of one man's mistake, one man's sin, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Later on in that same passage, verse 20 says, where sin abounds, grace much more abounds. And listen, let me be clear on this. We're not talking about a license. Well, I guess I can just do whatever I want to do, live however I want to live. In fact, Paul goes on to actually talk about this. He says, hey, should we keep sinning, keep on sinning and sinning more, keep making as many mistakes as possible so we can get more miracles? No, because that's not what grace is about. But I really believe this. I think the problem for us is not that you're intentionally creating things so you can get more miracles. I think the problem for so many of us, for most of us, is you don't think you can get a miracle because you made a mistake. And I'm telling you that it's the mistake that invites the miracle. And listen, if you don't believe that, you don't believe the gospel. Because the very gospel message is Jesus is God's response to our mistake. It's the miracle of salvation, the cross, the empty tomb. Without our sin, without our mistake, without our rebellion, without our failure, without our screw-ups. Listen, there's no miracle of salvation. There's no Easter Sunday. There's no empty tomb. It's the miracle that follows the mistake. It's God's grace. And His grace is sufficient for you and for me. Now listen, I don't know what you did, but I do know that you can never step beyond His grace. The Bible says, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But God, I messed up. I messed this marriage up. I messed this job up. I screwed up so badly. Listen, you have a choice. You can live in that mess. You can live in regrets. Or you can take hold of the reality of the gospel message. This message that reminds us that if you and I have the courage to humble ourselves, to drop the persona, to get real with others, to get real with God, I'm telling you, you'll find God showing up and doing what only God can do. A miracle that only God can bring. A transformation and a change that only God can bring about. Through His grace. And through His heart and His love for you. I want to pray for you tonight.